Well, we're looking at another objection to Christianity specifically as we talk about apologetics, the objection that Christianity is repressive. Christianity is repressive. That's why this belief system of Christianity should be abandoned, because it holds people down and holds people back. It wants to press everybody into a restrictive mold, try to make everybody look the same and act the same and think the same, and has no room for people who color outside the lines. And so all of the negativity, all of the psychological confusion and psychological alienation that people feel is really the result of religion in general and Christianity specifically. And so we'd be better to abandon belief systems like Christianity for something completely different. This subject tonight is really going to go with what I preached on Sunday, and I really want to try, you'll hear some ideas repeated, but I want to drive some of these things home so that you can really begin to discipline your own mind in some ways that we can speak directly to this question, because I think this perhaps is the big objection to Christianity in our cultural moment right now. But the idea that Christianity is repressive is an idea that's been, it's really central to the modern turn as we moved into the Enlightenment as a Western culture. It has been building and growing, coming into fullness through the sexual revolution, past what's called modernity into something called postmodernity that I'll touch on tonight. And we're really seeing the fulmination of the idea that people's problems is that everyone's problem is that they're repressed. And if we could just get rid of repression and let everybody do what they feel like doing, then we could all be happy, well-adjusted people who really become who they are meant to be. And so this idea is reaching its climax, but it's been growing for a long time. My mom and dad are here tonight. David and Patty Hankins are here. And when I was thinking about my notes today and thinking about the fact that they were going to be here, I remembered something, and Dad, I did not tell you I was going to do this, but get ready. What'd you say? In the mid-1980s, Dad was on the Today Show, interviewed by Katie Couric. Do you remember vaguely what year that would have been? 91. So in 1991, how many years ago is that? 33 years ago, something like that? Dad was interviewed. Just correct me as I kind of lay this out. Dad was serving as the chairman of the Resolutions Committee for the Southern Baptist Convention. And in 1991, 33 years ago, which is a long time, 33 years ago, the Episcopal Church and the Presbyterian Church USA were in the process of abandoning the Christian sexual ethic. So already in 1991, those two denominations had either completed the process or were fully engaged in the process of adopting what is now known as gender ideology, or the LGBTQ plus worldview. And so they had a representative from the Presbyterians, PCUSA, they had a representative from the Episcopal Church, and Dad was the representative from the Southern Baptist Convention, because resolutions, each year that the convention gathers, they'll speak to current cultural issues through resolutions. And so the Southern Baptist Convention, which was completing its move back to theological conservatism. We had drifted to the left, and a process that my father and others gave leadership to had moved us back to a biblical footing. And so the Southern Baptist Convention had just reaffirmed the biblical sexual ethic as a convention. And so Dad, because he was the chairman, was asked to be the spokesman for this and to be on the Today Show. So everybody remember Katie Couric? Not everybody remembers, but you folks do. I do. And so it was a pretty big deal. And the Presbyterian makes his case, and the Episcopalian guy makes his case, and then Katie turns to Dad and she asks this question. I won't get it exactly right, but it's something like this. Katie asked Dad, why don't you think that it's better to have people be their authentic selves rather than live lives of deceit? So that was the question that she put to Dad. Of course, Dad gave a great answer to that, which is the lie is that sexuality practiced within covenant marriage between a man and a woman, the deviation from that is the lie. And to allow people to live in that lie ruins and wrecks their lives. And so it's not good to tell people lies. It's good to get people to come to the truth. But that question that Katie asked is representative of this worldview that I've been preaching about for the last couple of weeks called expressive individualism. What Katie wanted to know, and she was perfectly and completely filled with this worldview, so much so that she was easily able to ask the question, and millions of Americans heard the question and thought it was a perfectly reasonable question to ask, which is, since what someone believes as an individual, whatever their emotional preferences are, that is the truth. That's the truth. And to deviate from one's own personal truth, from one's own personal identity as it is defined by their emotional or psychological core, is a deviation from the truth into falsehood. Y'all follow me? All right? That's 33 years ago. That was the worldview of expressive individualism. The worldview is this: not merely that our emotions play a role in how we think, or our personal opinions play a role in how we come to decisions, but expressive individualism teaches that your personal point of view, your personal set of emotional reactions are the truth. They're more true than any other data points. And when any other points of view come your way that stand in the way of your personal truth based on your personal emotions, you choose how you feel over any other messages that you get, over any other expressions of what is true. And that's and I know I've been repeating this over and over and over again, but that's what I want you to catch. Not merely that our emotions tell us some things, or our personal disposition might give us some kind of insight about the world or ourselves or what we're supposed to do. The difference is, expressive individualism says that's the way to know the truth. And that's the way to establish your identity. And because that's become so pervasive, a man can say, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body. And say that into our culture with a perfectly straight face, no irony, no humor. But they're actually stating what they believe to be a fact. It is a fact. Because I feel like I'm a woman on the inside, that makes me a woman because my psychological core is the arbiter of truth. All right? Now, because that's not what the Bible teaches, and because that's not how you all grew up, you all know that maybe even 10 years ago, if you had heard someone say, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, you would have either laughed because you thought they might be trying to say something humorous, or you would have called the men in the little white jackets because someone had really lost touch with reality and needed some help. They were in some sort of distress. But in a very short period of time, it is now a commonplace. I was talking to one of our young moms today who was at a makeup counter with her little 7-year-old daughter, and they were kind of, just a mom and daughter little fun time together. And a man walks up with a woman's haircut and declares, I'm in the process of transitioning, and I need to start making some decisions about what kind of makeup I'm going to wear. And that's what one of our little third graders here in Baldwin County, Alabama has to, of course, this little mama says, because little girls especially are perceptive. What in the world is this? And what do you think the reaction was from the people working the cosmetics desk? Oh, yes. Yeah, call it the Today Show. That's right. That's the greatest thing in the world. And if anyone says anything negative to you, sir, we will ask them to leave. I'm sorry, ma'am. That's right, ma'am. Already you show how good I am at this, right? And so that's what I want you to catch. This is what Carl Trueman, and I'm really recommending Carl Trueman's book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. It's really helped me to think through some of these issues. And one of the things that Trueman says is this. He says it's really not right to use the word worldview to describe expressive individualism, because a worldview tends to describe a fairly well thought out rationale about how one understands how the world works. What Trueman says is that it's better to use an idea called the social imaginary. What that means is most people just believe what they believe because they soak it up from the culture that's around them. If you ask someone if you had asked the people in that makeup place, if they understood that they were expressive individualists, they would know what you were talking about. Or if you asked them to take 10 minutes and lay out for you how they understand how the world works, the role that one's personal, emotional state plays in the formation of their identity, they wouldn't be able to lay that out for you. They most likely would not be able to articulate that to you. So it's not a worldview in the sense that it's this consciously chosen approach to life. But it's so pervasive in our culture, so pervasive in our institutions, and repeated so often that whether anyone really specifically has a moment in time when they convert to this idea, it is now the default position for the people that we engage with all the time. So much so that even though they might not be able to articulate it, if someone contravenes it, they're willing to say, we'll throw you out of our shop if you don't buy into this worldview. So it's pretty convictional, even if it's sort of poorly articulated and poorly grasped, all right? But all of that, what that worldview says to that poor troubled soul who came into that makeup shop is the reason you're miserable is because you're a woman trapped in a man's body, and our culture has done you the disservice of not letting you express, and that's what expressive individualism is. It has two components. One is, I am my emotional state. I am my emotional response to things. And everyone else must deal with me accordingly. That's the expressive part of expressive individualism. That the goal of culture up to this generation, in this historical moment, it was always the job of culture to say to people, you're incomplete and unformed and ignorant, and you don't know what you need to know, and you don't know how to live. And the culture's job is to say, there's greater possibilities for you, but you're going to need to grow up. There's greater possibilities for you, but you're going to need to be taught, and you're going to need to be helped to understand what's really important and what's really true and what really matters. And it was the culture's job to alert people to that. Basically, by one of the important things that the culture does is say, stop doing that. That's kooky. That's odd. That's not the direction you want to go in. Stop that. But that's been flipped upside down. And so that's what's new, is now the culture exists to help you be the version of yourself that you know you are on the inside. And so what Trueman and others say is what our culture really is an anti-culture. Our culture is an anti-culture. It's the opposite of what cultures have done up to this moment. All right, but I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But this is the culture. This is the cultural presupposition of the lost people that you're going to be talking to. And so we need to understand it so that we can communicate the gospel to them. And how that cultural disposition manifests itself is in the declaration, Christianity is repressive. If my whole purpose in life is to do whatever I feel like doing and be whoever I feel like I am, and it's everybody else's job to encourage me to do that. That's why we have words like affirm, right? Their job is just to affirm me in this psychological disposition of mine. Christianity, biblical Christianity, doesn't do that. Biblical Christianity names sin, and it talks about truth, and it talks about transcendent reality, and it says that life is found in having a right relationship with the one true living God, and then from that right relationship, being in right relationship with everything else, with everyone else and everything else God has made. And so Christianity, and frankly all other cultures up to now, has said what's going to happen is your soul needs to conform to what's true. But the anti-culture that we live in now says the world must conform to the state of your soul. What's out there must conform to what's in here, because what's in here is the highest and the most true. Okay? So, how do we speak to that? And so we've been talking about the two strategies for apologetics. One is evidentiary, which is the classic apologetics. We just say, well, let's examine the evidence at hand, evidence that maybe everyone could agree is evidence, and see if we can make the case from the evidence about what Christianity affirms. And so that's deductive. All right? We're going to pile together the evidence and deduce a conclusion. And then we'll look at the presuppositional approach, which is newer, and I think has a significant role to play in saying, even in people's objections, they reveal a set of presuppositions underneath the objection. Let's see if we can get them to examine their presuppositions and whether or not their presuppositions are warranted for their objections to Christianity. So let's look at the first end, the evidentiary approach. Does Christianity crush people? Is it the case that the unleashing of Christianity into the world has been bad for people, has crushed them and made them worse off? All right? Well, I'm just going to lay out for you some of the evidence. First set of evidence is, well, what does Christianity say about this issue? What does Christianity say about what makes the good life? What is the purpose for living? What does the Christian life look like? Does Christianity internally, does the Bible make the case that here's what we want to do? We want to crush people into a pre-packaged size and look so that everybody is very restricted and imprisoned and held back and diminished. Well, let's look at what the actual claims of Christianity are. First of all, life. What is before you look real hard at your notes there, what does Christianity say about what life is like as a Christian? Full, right? What else? I put some down here, but somebody said abundant. John 10:10. Jesus says, what does Jesus say in John 10:10? Anybody know? I've come that you might have life, and it's really the fullest possible life, eternal life, life that is full and abundant and goes beyond. It's life beyond death. In fact, more alive beyond death than not. Abundant life, meaningful life. Matthew 6:25. Jesus says, "Don't you know that your life is more than food, your body is more than clothes? There's more of a purpose to your life. Seek first the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all the other things that you need to do that, they're going to be given to you." All right. So the biblical claim is abundant and full and meaningful life. Freedom. Does Christianity promise a life of imprisoned restriction and heavy burdens and a just sort of a slogging through existence, one hard footstep in front of the other? What does the Bible say about freedom?
Freedom from sin.
That's right. John 8:32, Jesus says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Galatians 5, it is for freedom that you've been set free. They're not even trying to hide it. We want you to be so free you can hardly believe it. 2 Corinthians 3:17, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Now, this is a discussion for another day, but I touched a little bit on what freedom really is. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. That's just one other version of being in prison. True freedom is being fully aligned with your created purpose. That's when you are most free, is when you are living in alignment with the purpose for which you've been made. Then the issue of rules is Christianity, really the focus and the center of Christianity is having a bunch of rules to follow. Just having all these things that you have to keep track of, and they're minuscule and they're nitpicky. Is that Christianity's claim about the function of rules? What's Christianity's claim about how the works of the law function in one's salvation? Right?
It doesn't function at all in salvation.
That's right. For it's by grace you've been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast, right? The great message of Christianity is following rules per se. Following rules is the central goal. The effort of a Pharisee does not save. That won't save you. Now, that doesn't mean that rules don't matter. Our righteousness should exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees. But once again, real freedom is living in conformity with that with which you've been created. Yeah.
Sometimes I guess some people could get confused when Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son. And he was blessed because of his deed, his willingness. Some people attest that to work.
Right, and we know that there is this biblical and certainly New Testament tension between faith and works. You got James and you got Paul. Sometimes they're set in opposition to one another. But my point simply is this, is that those of us who know the message of the gospel know that what we proclaim to people is not 1,000 rules they get to follow so maybe they can get into heaven or maybe they can have a relationship with Jesus. We proclaim something different, is that what does the law do? What's the significant purpose of the law? Is to demonstrate your need to be saved, your need to be rescued from your sinfulness and your inability. Anyway, y'all get my point. Christianity doesn't preach that following a bunch of rules puts you in right relationship with God. It preaches it teaches essentially the opposite. And then relationships. What the Bible tells us about a relationship with God and about a relationship with one another is that they're to be rich and full and real. The Bible holds up, for instance, Genesis chapter 1, marriage, where a man and a woman are created in the image of God, created for each other, created for intimacy and for world change, and that is carried all the way through. The household codes in Ephesians and Colossians speak of a husband's love for his wife, a wife's respect for her husband, and the joy that brings. Ethics. The ethic of Christianity is love. 1 Corinthians 13, what does it say? That when you boil it all down, what fuels Christian behavior? Love. Love. We're told to love one another. And when Jesus was asked to sum up the commandments, love God, love other people. If you want some rules, that's the rule. So, so here's my point. The evidence that we find in the Scriptures is not a call to restriction, a call to repression, to a life of drudgery, to a legalistic nitpicking, mean-spirited, harsh, condemning way of life, but the New Testament calls us to something completely different. And then within this, then what is one of the objections to Christianity that people will make about how Christians behave as a falsifier of the Christian faith? That we lay out the beauty of Christianity, and then there are lots of Christians who don't live up to it. So I'm not going to go to that church because of all those hypocrites, or I'm not going to be a Christian because of all of those hypocrites. Is the failure of Christians to live completely in alignment with the Christian faith a knockdown falsifier of Christianity? No. Because it doesn't matter what your belief system is, you tend to struggle to live in conformity with it. All right? And so, yes, we are sinners in need of a Savior. We're in a process. We need great grace. But just because Christians struggle to live up to this standard is not a falsifier of Christianity. And then external evidence to Christianity. That's there in B. What is and I sort of took it like this. What is the actual impact of Christianity on the world? What is the actual impact of Christianity or the Judeo-Christian worldview on the world? Well, y'all help me out with this. This will be a little bit more audience participation. What's the historical impact of the Judeo-Christian worldview on the world? Has it made the world better or made the world worse?
Established all of our rules and regulations.
It is the belief system on which Western civilization sits, and it has lifted the world. I gave you a couple little tidbits there. In 1800, there were 1 billion people in the world. 1 billion people on the planet. There are 8 billion people on the planet now. 200 years later, there are 8 billion people on the planet. And the reason there are 8 billion people on the planet is because of what has flowed out of the biblical idea that every single person is created in the image of God and should be treated as such. That high valuation of individual people, that sense that every single individual person has great value to God, that is a Judeo-Christian idea. That's where that idea comes from. Not just the people in my group, but all the people in the whole world. I was listening to an interview with Steven Pinker. Steven Pinker is an atheist, and he was making the claim that the reason why the world is so great now is because of the Greeks, because of Greco-Roman ideas, which they had a lot, they did a lot of good things. But the interviewer said, is there anything that Christianity gave us that you couldn't attribute to the Greco-Romans? And Pinker, who's at Harvard, by the way, he's no dummy, thinks for a moment. He says, well, the idea that you should treat powerless and vulnerable people as though they were greatly valued, that's pretty much original with the Bible. That's the whole game. And he's right. Not only is he right that that's the contribution of the message of the Bible, but it's the thing that's been a blessing, an unparalleled blessing to the whole world. In I think I have this right. In 1900, yes. In 1900, 90% of the world lived at poverty level. And 10% of the world lived above poverty level. Today, it's reversed. Only 10% of the world's population lives below absolute poverty. It's a stunning miracle. And by the way, not only Western values and Judeo-Christian values, but you know what's the number one reason for that reversal in poverty? I thought I heard somebody say it. Economics. What brand of economics? Capitalism, right? Capitalism is what has rescued the world. And anyway, and all of that rides on a Judeo-Christian worldview. So the historical impact, wherever you put Christianity, things get better. Wherever you put Christianity, people are blessed. Culture. How has Christianity transformed cultures in terms of individuals? We've already talked about that. What Christianity says is that everyone is created in God's image. Everybody has equal worth. That's had a tremendous impact. What about children? How has Christianity impacted how children are viewed?
They're people too.
They're people too. A great book by O.M. Backey, When Children Became People, is the title of the book. And he makes the case that it's Christianity that introduces the idea to the world that children are people too. Now we all sit and say, duh, everybody knows that children are people too. No, they don't. Or children have the same value as us. It's not apparent that someone who's 24 inches tall and 20 pounds has the same value as someone who's 6 feet tall and however many pounds I am. Right? The Bible taught that. It was transformative to children, transformative to the family. Families. How did Christianity transform families?
From multiple wives to one.
From polygamy, which is civilizations that practice polygamy can't get off the ground. It's the greatest promoter of violence between people that exist in the world. So one man, one woman for life, and that one man, one woman in a loving, intimate relationship with one another for life is the standard. Revolutionary. And then what you have are family units that are stable. And guess what you get when you have all your family units are stable?
Prosperity.
Then you have a prosperity because you have a stable society. They can endure lots of difficulty because it's got this undergirding of stable families. What about the Judeo-Christian worldview's attitude to the sick? What did you do with sick people before Christianity arrived? You just got rid of them, right? Where's the idea of a hospital come from?
Christians.
From Christians. It's a Christian idea. And so from there, and the poor. What was the attitude towards the poor? Again, they're just victims of fate. You put them at the bottom, that's where they belong, that's where they should stay, and they should stay there forever, and all the generations out of them should stay there forever. But what does the Bible say about poor people?
That you should care for them.
They're actually the most important. They actually have the greatest value. That is a statement of faith. And then that flows into institutions. So the way that flows into institutions like government is Judeo-Christianity sets the foundation for democracy. Education, the idea that frankly there should be education, that education should be free, that education should be for all. Those are Christian ideas. Healthcare, we've already talked about that, is a Christian idea. Science, really the impulse to reflect on and think about the intelligibility of God's creation is a Christian idea. The idea that the pursuit of truth redeems, that's a Christian idea. And those are the reasons to do science. And so you have science really grows up, and it's possible, nested inside of Christianity. And then, of course, religion. We have this life-changing announcement of the good news that grace is available for the worst of sinners. And a relationship with the God who changes everything is possible through the gracious gift of the one true God's Son. All right, and then finally, the last thing I'll give you is personal well-being. I put a little website there at the bottom. That's a Gallup poll. Gallup has been polling Americans about what brings satisfaction and peace and well-being. Has been polling Americans about that for decades and decades and decades. And church attendance and religious belief predicts well-being more than anything else, decade after decade, year after year, and still does to this day. It is a positive. Now, Christians aren't perfect, and there are manifestations of Christianity that can be ugly or restrictive or bad. People lose their way. Every institution does that, but the overwhelming story of what Christianity has done for people is that it hasn't crushed them. It has saved, rescued, and set them free. That's what Christianity does to people. Do you know what the number one, and this is a dead certainty in sociology, the number one predictor of recovery from addiction is religious conversion. The number one source of freedom from addiction is conversion. And so the evidence to hand tells the story that Christianity is good for people and that Christianity sets people free. And then the presuppositional approach. What is being assumed in this statement that Christianity is repressive? What's really undergirding that idea if there's so much evidence around us to the contrary? And so I've got there that question. What is meant by repressive? And I give you you're going to get some terminology here, but I promise I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. When the modern period began with the Enlightenment, so this would have been the late 1600s, there was this idea that it was Christian and religious superstition that was causing wars and causing people to have difficulty with each other. And if we could get rid of that those religious superstitions, then we could have a world that was filled with peace and love and that sort of thing. And so that began the flight from authority. The problem is external authority is bad for people. And then that rolled into postmodernity, which followed that line of thinking to its logical conclusion, which is the only authority that's certain for Eric is Eric. The only one who's qualified to determine the direction of Eric's life and what's true is me. And we'll talk about how that's worked itself out. So you have this process. Modernity says, let's get rid of these religious ideas in Christianity, all this talk about doctrine and angels and demons and how one is saved. All of that is not important. All you need are facts and logic, and you can be oriented properly in the world. Now I'm going to say that again because this is what sits at the bottom of our culture. Okay? If you give me the facts and you give me logic, that's all I need. And I can be oriented in the world. That was really the Enlightenment's experiment. How did it work?
Too many people think it's different.
That's right. There seems to be a lot more going on than facts and logic. Facts and logic are insufficient to give you meaning. They just don't, there's just not enough meat on the bone. There's more going on. And even things relegated to religious ideas. Why are people obsessed with religious ideas? No matter what you do to them, no matter how much you lecture them, people continue to say with their lives, I'm going to need more than facts and logic. This is not a trick question. Why do people still ask religious questions and why do they still want religious answers?
Because they don't know the real answer.
Because there's more than logic.
Do what?
Because there's more than facts and logic.
Right, like what?
Emotions.
Truth, love, how to get along with people, what happens when something bad, when things go wrong, what's the purpose in life, what happens after I die, what was going on, how did I get here, why have things gone wrong, how can they be set right? And facts and logic can't deliver the answer to any of the things we really want to know. And so the Enlightenment project ran out of gas, and wound up with what's called postmodernity, which is there really are no facts and there really is no logic. That's just a power game. There's only power. There's only power. People who have it and people who don't. And that's the whole game. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. So with the failure of Enlightenment ideas, you get some figures that I think is important for you to know. Rousseau. Anybody ever heard of Jean-Jacques Rousseau? All right. Rousseau was famous for saying, men are born free, but everywhere in chains. Men are born free, but everywhere in chains. Rousseau had this idea that every person is basically good, and every person's main problem is the culture into which they're born. Cultures exist to hold people back. And so the Romantics came along and they took up that idea and they said, that's really the romantic vision. Everyone really has true love in their hearts. And if you'll just pull all these restrictions away, the beautiful versions of people, well, that will just come forward. Sigmund Freud takes up this idea, and really what he says is culture exists to restrict people sexually. That's the main thing that culture does. Totem and Taboo is probably his most famous work, and he says that's really the main reason culture exists, is to keep people in line sexually. And so repression is a big idea in Freudian thinking. Everybody's sexually repressed, and if we could create a culture where all those restrictions are yanked off, everybody's true sexual identity will emerge and sort of coalesce with everyone else, and we would sort of have this sexual nirvana that we would enter into. And please know, that's what everybody on the left is up to. That's why they don't like families. That's why they don't like terms like male-female, man-woman, father-mother. They want all that to go because it's Freud's vision that culture exists to repress people sexually, and sexual expression and freedom is the real goal to shoot for. And then the project is let's yank the culture down, and utopia will emerge. Nietzsche takes Freud's idea and he just paints it across all areas of human experience, not just sexuality, but psychologically, economically, and every other way. That what Freud says is God is dead, the Enlightenment killed him, and we're going to need to make up our own values. And we can. We just need to create our own values. And then Marx takes that and really translates that into an economic theory, that people are economically repressed. And all of the institutions exist for one reason, and that's to keep poor people poor. And so the only way to fix that is to destroy the rich, take what they have, and then when everybody has the same economically, then utopia will emerge. So it's all this same idea that everything you see around you has been created to repress people and to keep those in power. That's what they use to stay in power. And so the only goal is to pull things down. That's why the students at Harvard think that Hamas is good. This is what we've done to our institutions. And if you don't think that this now is the default position, I listened to an interview. Is it Altman that's the guy at Harvard that's pulled all the money out? Altman, am I getting that name right? Anybody help me out? Sam? No, that's not right. Ackman. Ackman or Ackerman? No, Ackman. Ackman. So I'm listening to an interview from Ackman. Ackman's a Jewish guy, graduate from Harvard, has given cajillions of dollars to Harvard, and now he's upset, and rightly so. Major leftist. Okay, he is a left-leaning dude, and he is shocked by what's been going on at Harvard. He was stunned that all of these Harvard students would believe that Hamas is the hero. But why do all the students at Harvard think that Hamas is the hero? Because Israel is the oppressor, Hamas is the oppressed, and that's all that matters. That's all that matters. That's the only ethic that there is. Those in power deserve whatever they get. Those not in power can do whatever they want. And I know you hear that and you think, well, that's crazy talk. Well, the smartest kids in our culture are at Harvard. And that's what they think. Because that's what they've been taught throughout their whole educational experience. And what that proves is if you repeat lies to people over and over again, starts to sound true to them, right? And then what you get from Marx, when Marxism fails because the Soviet Union fails, and so you get something called critical theory. And critical theory is basically Marxism that's slid into cultural issues. And so instead of it being class, it's race and gender. And so, and that kind of brings Freud all the way back in. Because the people who are oppressed, they're oppressed because of their race, or they're oppressed because they don't fit into the right sexual categories. And so the culture exists to keep them in line, and the future needs to emerge as those as the institutions are destroyed that restrict people sexually. All right, and that's really, it's an oversimplification, but that's what critical theory is up to. Okay, so where it all flows into is that anything constraining oppressed expressive individualism must be repressed. It's this strange deal. These people, this worldview that's so insistent on ending repression, loves repression. If you don't believe what they believe, then you deserve to be repressed. And so let me re-give you that definition. Anything constraining oppressed expressive individualism. So expressive individualism is the idea that I should be able to do whatever I want. But that does not apply to anybody who goes into the oppressor class. And that's all of you and me. And so what they really mean is, if you are a sexual minority, or some other kind of person who could go into an oppressed class, then your sense of self-definition must be supported and enhanced and celebrated, and anyone who gets in your way needs to be removed. And really by any means necessary. And so the result of all of this is an inversion of the human project. I've already gone over this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it again. Culture used to call people to completion. Culture used to call immature, incomplete individuals to grow up, to take their place in their culture, to make their contribution, to take their responsibilities, to learn the things they needed to learn, so to have a life that was filled with meaning and impact and significance. But now the opposite has occurred. The culture's job is to knock out anything that might get in the way of someone's already perfect, self-chosen, self-defined identity. And that's why Truman likes the idea of the anti-culture. So it's anti-institutional, and that's why institutions are in such bad shape, is because no one can tell me what to do, no one can lay out for me and insist on a vision for my life, and so institutions aren't a value, institutions are a problem, and so we're in the process of destroying them. And that probably has me as frightened about our future as a nation and as a culture as anything. And we're seeing it, and I don't mean for this to get unnecessarily political, but I'll just offer a couple of evidences. When the judicial system prosecutes people politically, and it's obvious to everyone that that's going on, you're going to destroy the judicial system. Because the judicial system, like all other institutions, rests on people's confidence that people are going to do what's right. And so you had Jeb Bush write an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday defending Trump. I don't know if you know this, but Jeb Bush is no fan of Donald Trump. But what Bush says is, this is an issue of equal justice before the law. You pull that down, we are all going to pay, right? Then justice is political. That's horrible. I think that the press is ruined. I think the press is ruined. I don't know about y'all, but believe anything they say? Do you? When we go, oh, I don't believe anything they say, and I feel the same way, but you got to get your information from somewhere. Or it just, it promotes this loss of a shared vision. So it's anti-institutional. Where am I? And then it's anti-culture. I already talked about that. So here's my point. If someone wants to make the case to you that the preeminence of the expressive individual of the oppressed people is the preeminent goal of our life together, you can make a solid argument that is a destructive, ruinous, calamitous point of view that absolutely cannot support the idea of it being good for anyone. It's a calamitous worldview. And so here's how we might want to make our case then. And so you see there, the reality of constraint. I say, yay, constraint, all right? Repression is a bad thing. Well, repression is a harsh word, so let's use the word constraint. I think that's a better constraint. Constraint is wonderful. How does the kite reach its high heights up in the sky? Okay? It's got a string on it. It's got to have wind. And it's got to have the material for the kite. But what's necessary for that kite to take its incredible trip up into the sky? Got to have constraint. It's necessary. And if the kite says, I'm up 1,000 feet here, but I'd like to go to 2,000 feet. Cut that string. Is that going to serve the kite well? No, it's going to destroy it. Right? And so we need to happily cheer constraint. I'll show you how to do that. First of all, being requires boundaries. This is really one of the ideas that's at the heart of Genesis 1. When God starts to make the world, how does He make it? Starts off with everything in a big blob, formless and void, right? And then what does God start to do with His Word?
Speaks it.
Right? And then what does He do with what he starts to speak? In fact, it separates it. One of the strong words that goes throughout the all of Genesis 1, or the 7 days, is Him separating things. He separated the light from the darkness. He separates the waters from the waters. He separates. Another word is He gathers. So he gathers up the land and He gathers up the water. He puts things in their place, and Isaiah says, and He sets the boundaries between them. It says, then He starts to make creatures, but every time Genesis 1 talks about the creatures being made, there's a little additional data on there. He makes them how? After their kind. Okay? After their kind. They don't ever turn into anything else. They all have a species identity that hands from one to the next. All right? It's not a hodgepodge of things. And even those creatures have their definition. They're made for where they belong. God makes a space between the heavens, which is the air, and He makes the sea, and He makes the dry land, and then He makes things to go in them. Birds, and things for the water, and then things that go on the land. Right? So my point is this. One of the great philosophical challenges of the last 50 years or so has been called the framing problem. When one of the first things they ran into when they were trying to get robots to work is they couldn't get the robots to see. They thought that was supposed to be pretty easy. But actually, it's a mystery of how all of us right now are looking around and you're separating out. Light is just bouncing off stuff and bouncing into your retina, and then your mind divides them up. And if your mind cannot set boundaries around everything, you can't see. You can't see without limits. You have to have them. You can't see without constraints. There's perception is not possible without constraint, without boundaries. And so boundaries are good. These constraints are real, and these constraints play a role. They play a role in cultures, institutions, and worldviews whose job it is to maintain these constraints in order to mediate the sacred. It's the role of culture to say, there is a God, it's not you. There are males and females. You're this, not that. There's marriage and there's not marriage. It is absolutely the life-giving responsibility of cultures to constrain, or everything collapses together. One of the things that I've noticed as I've encountered people who struck me as being transgender people. First of all, none of them look happy. I'll just tell you that. And I sense collapse. That in a desire to be everything, they're collapsed into nothing. And it's exhausting. If you have to wake up every day and step one is, what gender am I today? Well, that's a very difficult way to live. And if you insist that everyone around you also has to guess how you're going to manifest yourself on a particular day, guess how everyone else ultimately deals with that problem. They don't relate to you. They stay away from you. Because there aren't any boundaries, which means there aren't any rules that can guide the relationships. There are no rails for the relationship to run on. And so culture, because the natural state of us is to be unstable, and so culture stabilizes these boundaries and mediates them, and it mediates them up a value system so that it can tell us what's most important. Because here's what you can't get human beings not to do. Human beings want to know what's most important. We can't help it. We arrange things in value structures. You do it without thinking about it. This is more important than that. You do it all day long, every day. Now, many times you get the actual valuations wrong, right? It's called getting your priorities out of whack. You ever gotten your priorities out of whack before? We all do that. It doesn't mean we're perfect at it or even great at it. But we can't not do it. We know that some things are more important than other things. And if you work that up a value structure, what do you get to? Well, if you keep working up on what's more important than another thing, what do you eventually hit? You hit what's most important. And then you have to make the case, have I found that which is the most important? And we can have real conversations about that. And here's the good news. I think you have to get to the God and Father of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to get to what's most important. I think He's necessarily at the top of that. It's called the ontological argument for the existence of God. And Augustine said it, my soul is not at rest until it finds its rest in you. That's what Augustine knew. It's the God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every single person. We're on this search. That's what a transgendered person is in search of. They feel empty and lost and confused, and they don't know which way to turn, and they're trying to find an answer to a problem. It's a horrible answer, but it's the same question that we're all asking. How can I connect with that which is most valuable? And the lie that our culture has told people is, well, the thing that's most valuable is how you feel. The thing that's most valuable about you is how you feel you think you should manifest yourself. And that's just a lie. And a lie that it's important for us to point out. So, then my little statement, and I promise I'm winding this up, y'all have been great tonight, is instead of expressive individualism, what does Christianity teach? And this is my word, I made it up, and so if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. Purposed relationalism. If it's not expressive individualism, then I think what Christianity teaches is purposed relationalism. One good thing about this phrase is it sounds fancy. It's got lots of syllables in it. And what I think I would like for us to learn to do, what I'm going to try out as I talk to people who are expressive individualists, is to say, Well, the issue that we're struggling over is that you're an expressive individualist and I am a purposed relationalist. That at least might put them on the heels the same way they intend to put you on your heels. But I really do think this is what this is about. What is a person? What are we? What are we? And if you think that we are our emotional core, then you and I are not working off the same sheet of music. Therefore, if the person I'm talking to says, no, now that you've described expressive individualism, yeah, I think that's how the world works, then make your case for it. Because I'm going to suggest to you that it's got a lot of problems. We can no longer let people just stipulate expressive individualism and go, well, I guess that's one way of seeing it. And so when little Jimmy comes to school the next day and he wants to be little Susie, is you have to find a way to say to him and to the people who are supposed to care for him, you're letting expressive individualism run wild. And you're insisting that this point of view of yours, which is a religious point of view, is true. And you don't get to do that. You don't, and impose that on the rest of us. That's not the right way to view what little Jimmy is. Little Jimmy is not an expressive individualist. There's more to little Jimmy than that. And so, what then is purposed relationalism? Here's what I think. We are made for and regulated by a connection and conformity with transcendent reality. I think what our existence tells us is that we're made for something beyond us. And we must find out what that is in order to become who we're supposed to be. All right? Secondly, we need competent, moral, flexible institutions to mediate and regulate that process of individuals coming to find out why they're here. Purposed means I have a purpose, and that purpose is found and lived in relationship. And so I've got to be rightly related. I've got to be rightly related to that which is ultimate, and I've got to be rightly related to the other people around me and to really everything else that is. And we have to have institutions to help us do that. Competent, moral, flexible. Let me just real quick. What makes institutions great is not that they're powerful. That's critical theory's lie. What makes institutions great is that they're competent. They're good at what they do, and we want institutions that are good at what they do. You ever encountered an incompetent institution? Oh yeah, right? Somebody said DMV. Now shame on y'all. Right? Because of sin, everything devolves. And institutions devolve toward, one thing they devolve towards is incompetence. That's just where they go. And that's churches, that's all things. And so one of the battles is the devolution in incompetence. And then the danger is, since institutions become incompetent, let's get rid of the institutions. Wrong. What do we need to get rid of? The incompetence, right? Maybe by getting rid of the people. Is that what you said? Get rid of the incompetence, right? Can you get rid of all the incompetence in an institution? No, but you can make a good whack at it. Because institutions, what did Churchill say about democracy? He said, democracy's terrible, except for all the alternatives. Right? And institutions are a real hassle. But what's the alternative to institutions? Chaos. It's vigilante justice. Let's get rid of the police department. How's that gone? Abolish the police. Has that been good for poor, vulnerable people? They have paid the heaviest cost. I think there was a murder in George Floyd Square last week. And abolish the police. See, the alternative is The streets run with blood. Because guess what about people? We have a hard time getting along with each other. Right? And so we need to have institutions who remind us and insist that all of us are made in God's image. Okay? Moral means, so institutions tend towards incompetence and institutions tend towards wickedness, tyranny. Anyway, and so you may encounter people who are incompetent in an institution, you may encounter people who are wicked. And so we have to work on that, get the wickedness. That's the people part. You can get rid of all the wickedness by getting rid of all the people. It's hard to run institutions without people. But let's work on making sure that they're not tyrannical and immoral. And then flexible, what that means is, and that's where the individual comes in. The great thing about every individual is we really are all unique, and we all have a unique contribution to make. And so sometimes an individual will join an institution, and an individual and you all are individuals. Was there ever a moment at work or at school or wherever God put you where you noticed something that needed to change? Right? Your institution needs to be flexible enough, it needs to be consistent enough that it guides people over time, but flexible enough that all these amazing new people who are God's making all the time and releasing into the world to do kingdom work, they're flexible enough so that people can say, I've noticed something. Or has anybody ever, or there's a new opportunity. Or maybe if we combine these two things, And so that's the beauty of the relationship between individuals and institutions, is that it's mutually beneficial. And so individuals contribute uniquely through institutions for that which is true and good and beautiful. All right? So where I think all that's going, then I'll be quiet, is what we need to be working towards as a culture is the recovery and the celebration of the Judeo-Christian tradition. It says open, but it means upon which Western values are based, so that everyone can be taught purposed relationalism. Now that's just kind of a dream I'll toss out to you. But let me sum up. As an apologetic task, what I'm asking you to do is take an opportunity when someone is making the case that expressive individualism is the correct fundamental assumption about how culture should work, is that we need to get ourselves equipped to have the conversation with them at that level. What they want to do is they want to debate all the stuff, and so get in debates about transgenderism or particular things or the evils of capitalism or whatever it might be, and those are fine discussions. But really there's something deeper that I think there's an opportunity to have conversations, productive conversations about with people, which is what are we? What are we? And who says? And what we believe as Christians is, what are we? Is we're made in the image of God, and who says? God does. Yeah.
So what would be your first response to somebody who says that?
Well, that's a great question. Here's what I think right now. I don't know if this is the right thing. I think I would say something like, you're really laying out a view called expressive individualism, which I don't agree with. And I have a view that's different from that. And
would you tell them what that is that you coined? Say it again.
That it is, I even have to read it. That's how good I've memorized it. Purposed relationalism. I believe that what describes us is that is the self is best described as purposed relationalism. That we have a purpose that's forged and found in relationships with God and others. All right. Well, I had fun. I hope you did. And again, thank you for being here tonight. And let me pray for us. Any other final questions? Okay. Let me pray and I'll let you go. God, we love you and we thank you that you've put us on mission. Thank you that through Christ we know our purpose. and that purpose is rooted in our relationship with you. God, remind us that we can't be fully alive if we're not walking in fellowship with you. And then the point of our lives is relationships, not things, but people. And so, God, help us to be always ready to make the most of the relationships that you set us in, because we know that you've brought that about so that you could bring your truth through us to them. Help us to do that in Jesus' name. Amen.